The distance between us, the rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Blackwood's downtown office, each drop creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below. He sat hunched over his drafting table, the blue glow of his computer screen illuminating the architectural plans that had consumed his life for the past 18 months. The Meridian Tower project would be his masterpiece, a testament to innovation and design that would cement his reputation as one of the city's most visionary architects. But success, he had learned, came with a price that seemed steeper with each passing day. His phone buzzed with a text from Celeste. "Dinner at Romano's? I have news about the gallery showing." The message brought the first genuine smile to his face all week.
Celeste Hartwell had entered his life like a burst of color.
In a world that had grown increasingly gray, where his days were filled with blueprints and building codes, she painted emotions onto canvas with bold strokes that seemed to capture feelings he had forgotten he possessed. Marcus glanced at the framed photograph tucked behind his Monotera. Picture from 3 years ago showing him and Violet at a company retreat, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. Violet's auburn hair caught the sunlight, and her green eyes sparkled with the kind of joy that had first drawn him to her during their college years. They looked happy then, before the miscarriages, before the 70-hour work weeks, before the silence that had gradually filled their home like a thick fog. The separation hadn't been dramatic or filled with shouting matches. Instead, it had been a quiet dissolution, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. One day, Violet had simply said, "I think we need some space," and he had nodded, too exhausted to fight for something that felt already lost. That was 22 months ago, and neither had filed for divorce. They existed in a strange limbo, legally married, but emotionally severed, sharing only the occasional text about practical matters like insurance or tax documents. Marcus saved his work and reached for his jacket. The office building was nearly empty at 9 in the evening, but this had become his normal routine. Work until exhaustion, grab dinner with Celeste if she was available, return to his sleek downtown apartment that felt more like a hotel room than a home. It was a life that looked successful from the outside but felt hollow in those quiet moments. When he allowed himself to truly think, Celeste was waiting at their usual table when he arrived at Romano's, dark hair falling in loose waves over her burgundy sweater. She looked up from her wine with that radiant smile that had the power to make him forget his troubles, at least temporarily. "You look tired," she said, reaching across to touch his hand. "When's the last time you took a real break?" After the Meridian presentation, he replied automatically, though they both knew he'd said the same thing about the last 3 major projects. "You mentioned news about the gallery?" Her eyes lit up with excitement. "Thompson Gallery wants to feature my collection next spring. It's exactly what I've been working toward for years." She paused, studying his face. "Marcus, I know we've been taking things slowly, but I've been thinking about us, about the future." The future. It was a concept that had become both compelling and terrifying. With Celeste, he could envision possibilities, travel, shared dreams, maybe even the family he and Violet had tried so desperately to create. But something always held him back, some invisible thread that connected him to a life he thought he'd left behind. "I care about you, Celeste. You know that," he said carefully. "I do know that. But sometimes I feel like you're only giving me part of yourself, like there's something you're holding back." Her voice was gentle but direct, the way artists often were when they saw things others missed. Marcus squeezed her hand, wishing he could explain the complexity of his feelings, the way guilt and hope seemed to wage constant war in his chest. Instead, he smiled and asked her about the gallery showing, letting her enthusiasm wash over him like a warm tide. For now it was enough to pretend that moving forward was as simple as deciding to do so. New beginning spring arrived in the city with an explosion of cherry blossoms that lined the streets like nature's confetti. For Celeste, it felt like the universe was celebrating alongside her budding relationship with Marcus. Their Saturday morning routine had become sacred coffee at the small bistro near her studio, followed by long walks through the art district where she would point out pieces that inspired her latest work. "The architectural firm wants to host a gala," Marcus said, stirring honey into his espresso. "June 15th. It's going to be huge." The major developers, city council members, even some international investors. They want to officially unveil the Meridian Tower model and announce the groundbreaking. Celeste's pulse quickened. She had been waiting for Marcus to include her more fully in his professional world. It sounds incredible. Will you be speaking? The keynote address, actually. 3 years of work all leading to this moment. Yeah. Looked up from his cup, his gray eyes holding a vulnerability she rarely saw. I want you there, Celeste, as my partner. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had fully voiced until now. Partner. Just girlfriend. Not just someone he was dating, but the person he envisioned standing beside him as he stepped into this new chapter of his career. I'd be honored, she said, reaching across to cover his hand with hers. Across town, Violet Blackwood stood in the small garden behind the cottage she had been renting since the separation. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the herbs she had been carefully tending. Gardening had become her meditation, a way to nurture life when everything else felt stagnant. Her phone rang, interrupting her peaceful moment. Violet. It's Nora. Marcus's younger sister had always been the bridge between them, refusing to let the separation completely sever family ties. How are you, sweetheart? Violet asked, settling onto the wooden bench Marcus had built for her birthday 2 years ago, back when they still celebrated such things together. I'm good, but I'm calling because I wanted to invite you to something. Marcus probably hasn't mentioned it, but his firm is throwing this massive gala next month. I know things are complicated between you two, but I think you should be there. Violet's chest tightened. She had been carefully avoiding Marcus's professional events, understanding that her presence would only complicate whatever new life he was building. Nora, I don't think that's appropriate. He's moved on, and I respect that. Has he, though? Really? Nora's voice carried the stubborn determination that had made her a successful lawyer. Violet, I see him at family dinners. Talks about work. About projects, but there's something missing. He's going through the motions of happiness, but it doesn't reach his eyes. That's not my responsibility anymore, Violet said gently, though her heart ached at the thought of Marcus struggling. Maybe not. But what if I told you that I have something important to discuss with you, something that might change everything? 3 weeks earlier, Violet had sat in Dr. Martinez's office, staring at the ultrasound screen in disbelief. 3 miscarriages and countless specialists telling her that pregnancy might not be possible. She was looking at the unmistakable shape of a healthy 8-week-old fetus. The baby's heartbeat had filled the room like a tiny drum, strong and steady and miraculous. This changes everything, she had whispered to the empty examination room after the doctor left. But did it? She and Marcus had been separated for nearly 2 years. He was building a new life with someone else, someone who could presumably give him the children and happiness that had eluded them during their marriage. What right did she have to disrupt that with news of a pregnancy that might end in heartbreak? As the others had? I've been thinking, she said to Nora now, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Maybe it would be good to see him in his element, to get some closure. Closure, Nora repeated, her tone suggesting she didn't quite believe that was Violet's only motivation, as spring melted into early summer. Marcus threw himself into gala preparations with the same intensity he brought to his architectural projects. The event would be held at the Grandview Hotel's ballroom, with its soaring ceilings and panoramic city views. Everything had to be perfect. The presentation, the model unveiling, and most importantly, the moment when he would introduce Celeste to his professional world as the woman who would be part of his future. Celeste had commissioned a dress for the occasion, a flowing emerald silk that complemented her dark hair and brought out the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. She had been practicing her introduction speech, wanting to make the right impression on the influential people who shaped Marcus's career. Are you nervous? She asked him, the night before the gala, as they sat on his apartment balcony overlooking the city lights. Terrified, he admitted with a laugh, but also excited. This feels like a beginning, doesn't it? Like we're finally ready to stop tiptoeing around what this is between us. She curled against his side, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the evening breeze. Tomorrow would mark their official debut as a couple, the moment when their private happiness became public knowledge. It felt like stepping into sunlight after months of shadows. The grand announcement, the Grandview Hotel ballroom, had been transformed into an architectural wonderland. Suspended from the ceiling, scaled models of Marcus's most celebrated designs rotated slowly in pools of warm light, while the centerpiece, stunning glass and steel replica of the Meridian Tower, commanded attention from its position on the main stage. The city's elite moved through the space in evening where their conversations a sophisticated buzz punctuated by the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Marcus adjusted his bow tie for the third time as he surveyed the crowd from the side entrance. 5 years of planning had led to this moment, and everything was falling into place perfectly. The mayor had already praised the project publicly. 3 major investors had approached him about future collaborations, and the architectural press was documenting every detail. "You look handsome," Celeste said, appearing at his elbow in her emerald dress. She had spent the afternoon at the salon, and her hair was swept into an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings he had given her for her birthday. "Are you ready for this? With you here?" "I can handle anything," he replied, meaning every word. Her presence had become his anchor, the steady force that kept him grounded when the pressure of success threatened to overwhelm him. The evening progressed flawlessly. Marcus mingled with guests, discussed technical specifications with fellow architects, and accepted congratulations on what everyone agreed would be a landmark addition to the city skyline. But the highlight would come during his keynote address, when he would officially announce the project's commencement and, more personally, introduce Celeste as his partner in life, as well as in this celebration. At the back of the ballroom, largely unnoticed in the crowd, Violet stood near the bar wearing a simple navy dress that she had owned for years. She had spent 20 minutes in her car after arriving, debating whether to leave before Marcus spotted her. The past 2 years had changed him. He looked more polished, more confident, but also somehow more distant from the man who used to build furniture in their garage and surprise her with midnight picnics in their backyard. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," Nora said, materializing beside her with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I'm still not sure why I did," Violet admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. Her morning sickness had mostly subsided, but the smell of wine still made her queasy. "He looks happy, does he?" Nora studied her brother across the room. "Look at his eyes, Vi. Really look." Violet followed her gaze and saw what Nora meant. Marcus was performing happiness, smiling at the right moments, engaging enthusiastically with guests, but there was something hollow about it, as if he were watching his own life from a distance. It was the same expression he had worn during their last year together, when they were both trying so hard to fix something that might have been irreparably broken. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced over the sound system, "please welcome Marcus Blackwood for tonight's keynote address." Applause filled the room as Marcus took the stage, Celeste beaming with pride from her front row table. The presentation was masterful. He spoke passionately about sustainable architecture, about building structures that would serve future generations, about the responsibility architects had to create spaces that elevated the human spirit. The Meridian Tower, he explained, would be more than just another skyscraper. It would be a beacon of innovation and environmental consciousness. "This project represents everything I believe architecture should be," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "More than that, it represents hope for the future. And speaking of the future," he paused, his eyes finding Celeste in the crowd. She sat forward slightly, her hands clasped in her lap, clearly aware that this moment had been planned. "I want to take this opportunity to share something personal with all of you. This journey hasn't been one I've walked alone. I've had the incredible fortune to have someone by my side who has reminded me what it means to create from the heart, to find beauty in unexpected places, and to believe that second chances are possible." Violet felt her breath catch in her throat. Around her, the crowd had fallen silent, sensing the significance of the moment. Marcus gestured toward Celeste, who rose gracefully and joined him on stage to enthusiastic applause. "Celeste Hartwell is not only a brilliant artist in her own right, but she has become my partner in every sense of the word. Tonight, in front of all of you who have supported my career in this project, I want to officially introduce her as my future wife." The ballroom erupted in cheers and applause. Celeste's face radiated joy as Marcus pulled her close, and camera flashes lit up their embrace like stars. Several guests called out congratulations, and someone in the back started chanting speech. Speech. But in that moment of triumph, Marcus's eyes swept the crowd and landed on a familiar figure near the bar. Time seemed to slow as recognition dawned on his face. Violet stood perfectly still, her green eyes meeting his across the crowded room with an expression he couldn't quite read, not anger, not sadness, but something deeper and more complex. The applause was still echoing when Violet began walking toward the stage. The crowd parted naturally, some guests recognizing her from the society pages of years past, others simply sensing that something significant was happening. Her steps were measured and deliberate, and with each one, Marcus felt his carefully constructed new life beginning to shift beneath his feet. Celeste noticed his distraction and followed his gaze, her celebratory smile faltering slightly as she watched the auburn-haired woman approach. "Marcus," she whispered, but he seemed frozen, unable to look away from Violet's approaching figure. Violet reached the edge of the stage and looked up at him with the kind of calm that comes from making an irreversible decision. The ballroom had grown quieter, though most guests were still caught up in the celebration and hadn't noticed the undercurrent of tension building near the front. "Congratulations on the project," Violet said, her voice carrying just far enough for Marcus and Celeste to hear. "It's everything you dreamed it would be." "Violet," Marcus managed, his voice hoarse with shock. "What are you doing here?" She glanced at Celeste, who was watching the exchange with growing confusion and concern, then back at Marcus. "Before you close our story forever," she said quietly, her hand moving almost imperceptibly to rest on her stomach, "you should know that you're about to become a father." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The celebration continued around them, guests laughing, glasses clinking. The gentle hum of success, but in their small circle, the world had suddenly stopped spinning. Shattered illusions. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Marcus stared down at Violet, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. Around them, the gala continued its momentum. Guests were beginning to approach the stage to offer congratulations. Photographers were positioning themselves for more shots, and the evening coordinator was gesturing frantically about the dinner service schedule. "I'm sorry," Celeste said, her voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. "Who is this?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. How do you explain in a single sentence that the woman standing before them was his wife legally, if not emotionally, and that she had just announced news that changed everything? Violet answered for him, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I'm Violet Blackwood, Marcus's wife." The color drained from Celeste's face. "Wife? But you told me you were divorced," separated Marcus finally found. His voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "We've been separated for 2 years, but not divorced," Violet added quietly. Not out of cruelty, but from a need for absolute clarity in this moment of chaos. Celeste stepped back as if she'd been struck. The emerald dress that had made her feel so beautiful moments before now felt like a costume in a play where she'd been reading from the wrong script. "You let me believe. All this time, you let me believe you were free." "Celeste, please, let me explain." Marcus reached for her, but she pulled away. "Explain what?" "That while I was falling in love with you, planning a future with you, you had a wife?" Her voice was rising, and several nearby guests had begun to notice the drama unfolding on the stage. "I need to talk to Marcus privately," Violet said, her calm contrasting sharply with the emotional storm building around them. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "No," Celeste said firmly, finding her strength in anger. "You don't get to show up at our celebration and make demands. Have something to say it here." Marcus looked between the two women, Celeste, beautiful and furious, and completely justified in her rage, and Violet, carrying news that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his future. The crowd was definitely watching now, phones discreetly appearing as people sensed that the evening's real drama was just beginning. "Is it true?" he asked Violet, his voice barely audible. "Are you really?" 14 weeks, she confirmed. "Healthy according to Dr. Martinez? After everything we went through before, I never thought." She trailed off, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. The mention of their previous losses hit Marcus like a second wave. Dr. Martinez had been their fertility specialist during the dark years, when month after month brought disappointment and grief. Celeste knew none of this history he had mentioned, only that his marriage had ended due to incompatibility and growing apart, the depth of pain and hope and shared trauma that connected him to Violet was something he had never been able to articulate to anyone else. "This is insane," Celeste said, her voice breaking. "You're telling me that in the middle of our engagement celebration, your estranged wife shows up to announce she's having your baby?" "We haven't been together in almost 2 years," Marcus said, desperately, trying to make sense of the timeline. Himself. "Violet, how is this possible?" She met his eyes with a look that reminded him of their early years together, when they could communicate entire conversations without words. "Do you remember the night you came to get your books? It was raining, and we got to talking about the old days," and the memory hit him like a physical blow. 6 months ago, during one of their rare interactions to exchange belongings, they had ended up spending the evening together. It hadn't been planned. They had simply started reminiscing about their college years, sharing a bottle of wine, and somehow the loneliness and familiarity had combined into one night of tenderness that felt like goodbye and hello simultaneously. They had both agreed afterward that it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that couldn't happen again. "Oh God," he breathed, running his hands through his hair. Celeste looked between them and saw the recognition in Marcus's eyes. "You slept with her? While we were together, you slept with your wife." "It wasn't like that," Marcus said desperately. "It was one night months ago, and it didn't mean anything. It meant everything," Violet interrupted quietly. "It meant we created a life." The words hung in the air like a judgment. Around them, the gala had taken on a surreal quality. The architectural models still rotated in their spotlights. The waiters still circulated with champagne, but the celebration felt hollow now. It's like a beautiful facade with nothing behind it. Celeste removed the promise ring Marcus had given her just weeks before and placed it on the podium, beside the microphone. "I can't do this," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I won't be the other woman in someone else's marriage, and I won't compete with a baby for your attention. Celeste, please don't go. We can work through this." "Work through what, Marcus?" "The fact that you're still legally married, the fact that you're about to have a child with someone else. It's the fact that you let me fall in love with a man who doesn't actually exist." She gathered her purse and rapped with dignity that made her departure even more devastating. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it's not going to be with me." She walked away with her head held high, leaving Marcus alone on the stage with Violet and the wreckage of his carefully planned future. The guests had begun to murmur among themselves, and he could see his business partners exchanging concerned glances across the room. "I should go," Violet said softly. "This wasn't how I wanted to tell you. I needed you to know before you made any permanent decisions." Marcus looked at Hurley the first time in months. She was thinner than he remembered, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions, but there was also something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. "Is the baby really okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "So far, yes. But Marcus, I'm not telling you this because I expect anything from you. I know you've moved on, and I respect that. I just thought you had the right to know." As she turned to leave, Marcus realized that for the first time in 2 years, he didn't want her to walk away. Not because of the baby, not because of obligation, but because seeing her again had reminded him of something he thought he had lost forever. The feeling of being truly known by another person. "Violet, wait," he called after her, but she was already disappearing into the crowd, leaving him alone on the stage with the echoes of applause still ringing in his ears, and his entire life suddenly, irrevocably changed. Rebuilding from the ruins for months later, Marcus sat beside Violet on a park bench. watching children play on the nearby swings while she absently rubbed her rounded belly. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. "Martina says everything looks perfect," Violet said softly, breaking the comfortable silence they had learned to share. "The baby's healthy, growing right on schedule." Marcus nodded, still amazed by how different this pregnancy felt from their previous attempts. There was hope now, cautious but real. Where before there had only been desperate clinging to possibilities that kept slipping away. "I've been thinking about names," she continued, glancing at him sideways. "Nothing too dramatic, just ... thinking." They weren't living together. Marcus had kept his downtown apartment, and Violet remained in her cottage with the garden she had, nurtured back to life. But they met twice a week for doctor's appointments, prenatal classes, and these quiet conversations that felt like slowly learning each other again. "I keep imagining teaching them to build things," Marcus admitted. "Little birdhouses, maybe a treehouse when they're older." "You always were good with your hands," Violet said, and for a moment, the weight of their shared history settled between them, not painful anymore, but significant. "Violet," he said, turning to face her fully. "I know we're taking this slowly, and I understand why. But I want you to know that I'm here. Not because of obligation, not because of guilt, but because somewhere along the way, I remembered what it felt like to actually see you." She was quiet for a long moment, watching a young couple push their toddler on the swing set. "I'm scared," she said finally. "Not of the baby. I'm surprisingly not scared of that anymore. But of us. Of hoping for something that might not work." "Then maybe we don't hope for anything specific," Marcus suggested. "Maybe we just show up and see what happens." As they walked back to their cars, Violet stopped suddenly and grabbed his arm. "Marcus, feel this." She pressed his hand to her belly, and after a moment, felt it a small but distinct movement, like a gentle wave beneath his palm. "That's our baby," she whispered, wonder filling her voice. Standing there in the fading afternoon light, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not the desperate love of their early marriage. Not the passionate intensity he had shared with Celeste. But something quieter and more sustainable, the kind of love that showed up for prenatal appointments and assembled cribs and learned to forgive. They weren't the couple they had been, and they might never be lovers again. But they were becoming something new, to people choosing each day to build something worth their child's inheritance.